My name is Carter. I'm the lead pastor here at Crossbridge, and I'm grateful to be with you all on this evening, this wonderful weekend in Miami. I was just sharing with some friends this last week. Have you felt like the cool weather has stayed around a little bit longer than normal? Isn't it amazing? I was getting cold at the beach last night, like actually wanted a sweater, and we're almost in May. God is good. Amen? Yeah, all the time. Well, listen, I've been excited to share this message with you all week. I've been thinking about it. I've been praying about it. I've been working on it. Last week, if you were here, you know that I had the week off, and Pastor Johnny shared a beautiful and convicting and powerful message. Can we honor him? Thank you, Pastor Johnny. And I got to focus on some other things happening in the life of our church, some exciting things in our church family, but I love to be up here. It's a privilege to get to share God's word with you all. We've been in this series called Back to the Basics since February. This is episode 10. We've had part 1, part 2. We have a few more weeks that we're going to be going through the book of Galatians. And we spent so much time because we felt like as a church, we needed to listen and sit under this message that Paul writes to these churches all across the region of Galatia. It's a message of freedom and of hope and forgiveness and of what the gospel truly is. What does it mean to really follow Jesus? Paul outlines this. We're in chapter 5 that Pastor Johnny just read from. He spoke about the first few verses, and the message was on freedom. And one of the things he said is that we're to root ourselves in the love of God and stand firm in freedom. Now, Paul is going to continue the discussion this evening in the second half of Galatians chapter 5 with a conversation on freedom. And what we're going to look at is how do we walk in freedom? We're to stand firm in it. We're to root ourselves in the love of God. But how do we actually walk in freedom? So as I was thinking about freedom, one of the things that I was considering is that if you have freedom in any aspect of your life, in a relationship, in a hobby, in your work, around a topic where you feel free to discuss and debate, what freedom, true freedom produces is great results. It produces incredible fruit. And one of the things you may or may not know about me is that when I was in high school, I started to learn how to play guitar. And I wanted to play guitar because I was really into emo music. Any older millennials in the room, can we give a shout out? Taking Back Sunday, Something Corporate, Fall Out Boy, Dashboard Confessionals. Guys, sound of my childhood. And I had friends that played guitar, and they said, listen, these are easy songs to play. It's like drop D, 4 chords. And I was like, I want to be the guy at the party. It's like, oh, you have a guitar? Let me try this out. And then I play like a popular song. Like, I want to be that guy. I mean, I didn't think through the singing thing. I just thought about the guitar. And so I got a guitar and I started to practice playing guitar. Can I play you something real quick? Come on. Ready? Come on, guys. Johnny, I'm going to use your guitar. Ready? Okay. I'm going to tell you one thing that you need to know about me. I practice 0% this week, okay? Ready? Tell me if you know this song. Ready? Ready? Today is gonna be the day that we're gonna throw it back to you. Come on. Listen. Is this the only song I know? Yes. I want to ask Josh to come up. Can you come up here real quick? Josh is our worship leader. Can we give a round of applause for Josh? This is an illustration. Josh, he's different than me at guitar. I don't know if you know this. He's been playing, how long have you been playing guitar for, Josh?
20 years.
20 years. Can you just play something for us real quick? Just a little something. I requested a song. Maybe you know this song. John Mayer, Neon. Can we give a round of applause to Josh? So Josh has been playing for 20 years. He played at the Florida State School of Music. You went there. And Josh and me are a little bit different at guitar. He's a little bit better than me. just a little bit, and I want to honor him. Can you give him a round of applause? Thank you, Josh. But don't worry, Johnny, I'm being careful with your guitar. It's a very nice guitar. Here, I wanted to show you that because I stopped playing guitar. I learned one song a little bit, and that's it. And then I was like, I can't go beyond this, and I stopped playing. Now, Josh has been playing for 20 years, and Neon is one of the harder songs to play on acoustic. He can play all types of stuff. You should see the stuff he can do. And the reason Josh is great at guitar is why? Because he took the time, he waited, he practiced, he put in the effort, he sacrificed, he surrendered to the craft. If you want to be good at guitar, you want to find freedom on guitar so you can pick it up and play whatever you want and do all kinds of stuff, you have to put in the work. You have to practice. And that is true of anything in life. If you want to find freedom in any aspect of your life, it will take work, practice, surrender, sacrifice. It requires those things, or else you just can play Wonderwall. That's it. And I say that because one of the markers of freedom is that it produces great results. But freedom requires things that we often think is not associated with freedom. Freedom, to experience true freedom, you have to take up the responsibility of restriction, of surrender, of sacrifice, and work. These things are required to experience true freedom in your life. And this is what Paul is saying in our passage, that freedom is not the absence of these things, it's actually the taking up of these things to experience freedom in your spiritual life. Now, before we dive into the passage and see exactly what Paul is saying, we need to talk about some of the destroyers of freedom. There are two things that are the great enemies of freedom, and the Apostle Paul has been talking about these throughout the letter, and he's going to focus on one of them tonight. The two great enemies of freedom is legalism and license. Legalism and license. If you want to experience true freedom, these things cannot be attached to you. Legalism and license. Let me define this for you. Legalism is an over-reliance upon law or rules or formula for deliverance. It is to say, in order for me to be delivered, in order for me to grow, in order for me to feel safe and comfortable and find freedom, I need to over-rely on my performance, on my good works, on formula and rules and religion. License is the opposite. License is a misunderstanding of freedom leading to unrestrained living. It is a misunderstanding of freedom. It's saying, oh, freedom doesn't require restriction or surrender or sacrifice or any kind of effort at all, and so I'm free to do whatever I want. Unrestrained living. The bulk of this letter, the Apostle Paul has been discussing legalism because this was prevalent in the churches in Galatia. All of these people were adding all of these things to their faith. It was Jesus plus my performance. It was Jesus plus my good works. It was Jesus plus my ability to uphold these religious laws. And if I upheld these things, then I felt safe with God. I felt comfortable. I felt like I was a good Christian. The Apostle Paul has been saying for chapters now, it is Jesus plus nothing. It is the love of God, the grace of God, the forgiveness of God alone that you are delivered and saved. It is not the adding of things. You see, legalism makes you feel as if you need to add something to Jesus. You need to add something to God's grace and His love and His mercy and His forgiveness because for some reason it's not enough. It's not enough, so you have to add. It's as if to say legalism is to say, God, I don't really believe that you've given me grace. Because grace is unmerited favor. So to be legalistic, to add anything to Jesus, to think that you have to perform for God, is to say, God, I read about your grace, but I don't really believe it. I feel as if I need to prove something. I need to achieve something. I need to show you something. I understand that I'm forgiven, but I don't know if I'm fully forgiven, and so I need to work it out so that you see that I'm able to be saved by you, that I'm worthy of grace. It's legalism. Paul here in our passage, he adjusts the lens from legalism to license, which is really the swinging of the pendulum from one side, which is Jesus plus my works and my performance, and now it's swinging the pendulum and saying, well, listen, if I'm free and forgiven, if God's grace is upon me, then I guess I can do whatever I want. License sounds like this: I'm forgiven, God's grace is upon me, therefore I can do whatever I want. I don't really need to live in conviction. I don't need to desire spiritual growth. Thank you, Jesus, because now I'm good to do me. That's the other side of the pendulum. Now, you may have never said that out loud, but you can say it in your spirit. It can be one of the driving messages of your life. The Oxford Dictionary defines license as a liberty of action, especially when excessive, a disregard of law or propriety, an abuse of freedom. See, legalism misunderstands God's freedom found through grace. Completely does not understand that freedom does not require your performance of God, but license is an abuse of freedom. The Apostle Paul says elsewhere that it's presuming upon the grace of God. One thing that might be helpful for you is that the Apostle Paul, or the way I think of legalism and license, is that legalism demands responsibility without freedom, while license grants freedom without responsibility. So legalism demands you. I have to be responsible. I have to perform. I have to uphold. I have to prove. But it does not deliver you freedom. You feel captive. While license grants you freedom. You feel free, but you have no responsibility. Neither of these things you will find true freedom in legalism or license. I want you to consider one of the great gifts that God gives, which is the gift of marriage. The pursuit of marriage is to feel fully free. It's a great gift of marriage, and healthy couples are pursuing the experience of feeling free with one another, where you can be yourself, you can share your dreams and your pain, and you can find support, and you can find love, and you can work through conflict, and you can grow. This is one of the great aspects of marriage, that when you find the person that God has called you to be with, you become one, and you can be completely free emotionally and mentally and spiritually and physically. Now, this type of freedom that can be discovered in marriage is not arrived at without responsibility. You have to take up responsibility for your actions and your attitude and your behavior and your temptations. You have to take up responsibility. You have to take up the responsibility of devotion and faithfulness and love. Love is an action. You have to take up the responsibility of those things. In fact, at every wedding ceremony, there are vows, and those vows are commitments. They're devotions of what you are going to do, the actions you're going to take. And by taking up those things, no matter what life brings, you will discover freedom. Have you ever been to a wedding where the vows went like this? I take thee to be my wedded wife or husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, as long as you don't ask too much of me or restrain me in any way. I commit to love you according to my definition of love, however I see fit. I will cherish you as long as you provide me the type of freedom that I desire. If you saw this at a wedding, you're like, what's going on? This is not good. We'd never see this. Why? Because we expect that healthy couples are committing to sacrifice and surrender for one another. That the vows that you take are saying, I am going to surrender, and I am going to sacrifice. I'm going to take up responsibility for what I bring into this relationship, and I know that no matter what life brings, if I commit to these things and you commit to these things, we will experience freedom. We will grow in being at peace and comfortable with one another. It is surrender and sacrifice that leads to freedom. Now consider our walk with God. The freedom, the spiritual freedom that we seek in our innermost being is discovered through taking up the responsibility of sacrifice and surrender. You cannot think, well, I can just do whatever I want, or nor can you think, I have to prove and perform for God. It is to say, God, you have given your grace and your mercy and your forgiveness and your love to me, and I've done nothing to deserve it. I cannot earn it. And so from a joyful and willing spirit, I want to surrender and sacrifice to follow your ways because they're better than my ways. That is how you discover spiritual freedom. It's the responsibility that you take up to say, I'm going to sacrifice, I'm going to surrender, not because I'm proving anything to you, God, but because it's a joy to do so, because of everything that you have done for me. Sacrifice, surrender, spiritual freedom is found in devotion and love and cherishing and faithfulness to God, no matter what life brings, from a willing spirit. This is exactly what our text is saying. Verse 16 through 18, the Apostle Paul says this. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want, license, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law, legalism. There's a diagram that I want to put up on the screen that I think will help. The Spirit is where we find true freedom. That's what the Apostle Paul is saying. Walking by the Spirit, living by the Spirit, being guided by the Spirit of God in your life. But there is a tension and a temptation that every one of us feels. And this is something that God revealed to me this week when I was studying that I've never seen before. If the Spirit and walking by the Spirit and being led by the Spirit is the path that we are to follow to find true spiritual freedom in our life, then every one of us in this room is either being pulled towards legalism or to license. Every one of us has a temptation and a tension within us to say, I need to add something. I need to perform. I need to show God that I'm worthy. Or you feel, I kind of just want to do whatever I want. I'm presuming on grace. I want to live my life with no kind of responsibility or authority structure over me. We're all being pulled in both of those ways. And the Apostle Paul is saying, do not gratify the desires of the flesh. Do not give in to those temptations and tensions, but be led by the Spirit. So if you are pulled towards legalism, then what is in you? There is something in you that is saying, I am under the law. No matter how much I hear that I am freed from the law, from the religious devotion and proving and my own personal holiness or good works, showing God that I'm deserving of His love, that there's something within you that says, I have a hard time accepting that and receiving grace, and I feel like I'm under the law. I just feel that. Maybe it's because you struggle with feeling worthy or adequate. And so rules and adding rules to your life helps you feel better and more comfortable in your own skin. Maybe it's difficult for you to release control. And because it's difficult to release control, religious formulas and rituals and metrics help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationship with God. Maybe you have idols of preference or demons of discrimination. And legalism is attractive because it helps you feel comfortable gatekeeping your community. See, any of these things could be true or other things. And so being under the law, though you might believe in your mind that it is oppressive, it gives you some sense of comfort, especially when you feel like you're doing a good job. When you're making the right decisions and you're doing the right things and you're trying your best, you have a sense of comfort because you're under the law, but you're trying your best, and so you feel comfortable and safe. The key question for you to ask is, what is leading you? What is leading your life and what is leading your faith? Is it moralism and religious checkboxes? Is it the need to attempt to measure up to yourself? And if you can measure up to yourself, then certainly you're measuring up to God too, because you're doing the best you can for yourself. St. Paul says, if you're pulled towards legalism and you feel like you're under the law, he says, be led by the Spirit. You are not under the law. Which means the Spirit's words should lead you. You should be comfortable in this presence of the Spirit and find assurance in God's word to you, not in what you can show to God. You should ask the Spirit of God to direct your steps so that you can let go of control. Now, if you're on the other side and you're pulled towards license, presuming upon grace or the abuse of freedom, and something in you is stirring, if that is the case, that tells you that you are over the law. If you don't feel under the law, then you probably feel over the law. And if this is you, you probably justify your actions or you squash conviction from the Spirit in your life, maybe through a prayer or saying to God, I'm never going to do it again, but deep down you know you're going to do it again. There's no real desire for change. Or maybe you've so abused the freedom that God provides by forsaking any responsibility in your faith that you settle for momentary highs in your spiritual life. And so you just try to go from spiritual high to spiritual high, and because you do that everywhere else in your life, and so you do it in your faith too, and you've settled for that. Or maybe your personal goals and desires have not been surrendered to God because you're just moving too fast to achieve what you think is a good life. And so God is always in the rearview mirror. And sometimes you feel like you're closer because you slowed down for a moment and he's closer to you, but then you go fast again because you have so many personal goals and desires and you got to achieve those things. And it leads you to unrestrained living. You think you're over the law. Though destructive, there's a sense of comfort. Because when you feel as if you're over the law, when you pause to re-engage your faith, when you pause to hear the grace of God, you feel comfort again, like, yes, God's grace. And then you keep moving in your own way again. The key question, if you're pulled towards license, to feeling over the law, as if God's ways and his word isn't really necessary for you, the key question is, who are you walking with? Who's directing your steps? Who's walking alongside of you? What is the person or the voice that is guiding you each and every day? And I thought of a couple examples of who it might be. Could be a podcast host or a motivational content creator. Can be. It could be a friend or mentor who has a life that you want to live, and so whatever they say, you do. It could be a vision pushed on you by culture of what a good life looks like, and so that it consumes what you do, and you make decisions and sacrifices, and you make compromises to try to achieve that. Who are you walking with each day? Because whoever has the loudest voice in your life and your decision making is who you're walking with. And it's really easy to diagnose the content that you consume and what you listen to determine whether or not the Spirit is the one that you're walking with, or whether it's someone else or something else that is guiding you. St. Paul says this, I say to you, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Walk by the Spirit means slow down, stop running, take a breath. YOLO is a lie. Do kids still say that? YOLO? I loved it. You only live once if you didn't used to use it 10 years ago. But see, the Spirit is telling for many of us that are pulled towards license, that think I can do whatever I want. We presume upon grace. It's the abuse of freedom. The Spirit is telling us, hey, I don't only live once. The Spirit is preparing me for eternity. I'm living for all eternity with God, and God has desires on my life. He has goodness on my life, and I want to follow him. I want to restrain myself, actually, so I can experience what God has prepared for me in eternity now. Walk by the Spirit. And St. Paul begins to list out some, not all, of the desires of the flesh. That if you are pulled towards legalism, this can be true, but certainly if you're pulled towards license, these things can be true. It's verse 19 through 21. And I want you to notice something. When this list was read, you're probably like, whoa, this is going to be an interesting sermon. But these things that I'm about to read, notice, they are so easy to fall into. It literally takes a moment to fall into them. It does not take work. It does not take preparation for many of these. They are temptations that can come in a flash and in a moment. It doesn't take surrender or sacrifice to follow these things at all. It says this in verse 19 through 21. The acts of the flesh are obvious.
sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. They are obvious. They are right before us. Now, right after this, the Apostle Paul gives a different list, different attitudes and different behaviors. And I want you to notice that these things that he's about to list are not easily acquired. It's not just you make a decision and boom, done. They take work, sacrifice, and surrender. Verse 22 through 23, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. None of us in this room, no matter how disciplined you are, can just say, you know what? I'm just going to choose today to always be at peace. It doesn't work like that. I'm always going to be full of joy. I will always be patient. We live in Miami, get in your car and drive, it's gone. It's gone. These things take work. They take surrender. They take sacrifice. You have to take up the responsibility of these things. But yet these are the things that we all desire to experience and to show to other people. These are the things that we want in our innermost being. The image of God within us is yearning to experience these things in everyday life and to show these things to other people. This is what we're pursuing. We want to be people that experience love and show love. We want to be people that are full of joy and cast out joy to other people. We want to be at peace, and we want to proclaim peace to others. We want to be kind to other people and experience kindness ourselves. We want goodness to come out of our life and experience goodness back. These are the things that we desire. These are the things that we are pursuing. I want to read it again, and I want you to think about where you're at in these things, okay? How prevalent are these things, these fruit, the fruit of the Spirit in your life right now? Just think about it. You don't have to say it out loud. Don't worry. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, if you're like me, you read this and you're like, you think about the last couple years, you're like, some of these things I've grown in. You're like, pretty good, you know? Got a little bit more patient. I don't know if that's true of me, but I'm trying. Grown in peace, joy. But there's some things that jumped out to you. For all of us. You're like, that one is a struggle. That one is tough. Don't ask my closest friends or my wife or my husband. They'll tell you. Some of these are tough. And we read this and sometimes we're like, man, I don't know if these things are going to manifest in my life. Some of these things are a real struggle for me. But I want you to notice something. All of these things that we desire our innermost being craves for, they're the fruit of what? The Spirit. They're not the fruit of your effort. They're not the fruit of your discipline. You're not going to leave here tonight and say, you know what? I've been struggling with joy. No longer. It doesn't work like that. See, the Spirit is the one who desires to produce and establish these things within you. And He will. The Spirit of God, it's why the Apostle Paul says it's in the power of the Spirit that the fruit of the Spirit is established within you. The Apostle Paul's command here to us is not for us to say, okay, everyone, figure out where you're weak on this list and just start working really hard to establish that in your life. No, it's not going to happen. The Apostle Paul says, listen, you need to understand, are you being pulled towards legalism of adding something to Jesus, of feeling like you have to perform for God? Or are you abusing freedom to say, I can do whatever I want? If you're in either of those places, forsake that, come back to the Spirit. When you walk with the Spirit, you're going to see these things blossom in your life. That is what he is calling us to. It's not more work. It's not more focus or discipline. It is to focus our life on walking and being led by the Spirit, and then the fruit will blossom. The language is intentional. I don't know if you know this. I know this, and I've only been on a farm 4 times in my life. Fruit does not grow before your eyes. You don't watch an apple grow. You don't see grapes grow. Those are the only 2 fruits I could think of. You don't see it happen before your eyes. And in fact, they grow slowly, they take time, and they grow over seasons. It takes seasons. And what's required for fruit to grow from a tree or from a plant is proper sunlight and water and soil. These things are required. In your spiritual life, the Apostle Paul is saying, if you want to see the fruit of the Spirit grow in your life, you want to see these things find root and establish, you can experience freedom. It is not through more effort, and it is not through just doing whatever you want. It is by having the proper sunlight and water and soil in your life so that fruit would be produced, and that is simply a focus on walking with the Spirit. That is what you need, to walk with the Spirit and be led by the Spirit. That's why he says in verse 25, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Right after he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, he's like, listen, we all desire this. Live by the Spirit and keep in step with the Spirit. Now that may just be like, pie in the sky, like, great, yes, live by the Spirit, keep in step with the Spirit, but what does that look like? How do I walk in that freedom? How do I actually live out that freedom? Now, all throughout the Bible, there's all these things that different apostles share with us, and Jesus also shares with us, which we call in the church spiritual disciplines. I talk about them all the time. And these things are when you engage in spiritual disciplines, they open up space for the Spirit's voice to speak loudly to you, for conviction to come, for guidance to come, for comfort and encouragement to come. When you engage in the disciplines that God gives you so you can hear the Spirit's voice. Things like consistently reading your Bible. And you may say, I don't know how to read the Bible. I don't really know how to study the Bible. It's foreign to me. Listen, it's not on your ability to read the Bible the Spirit will speak to you. Just read it. It's a life of prayer, of engaging with God in conversation. As Jesus said, you don't have to have the right words to say, just talk like you talk to a friend. It's in moments of silence, like turn your phone, do not disturb, and take 10 minutes and just be silent for God and ask God to speak to you. Don't say anything. No agenda. It's through setting your mind on God. One of the things for me, a practice for myself, is when I know I have all these pressures and all these things in my mind and I need to set my mind on God, worship music is the vehicle through which I do that. Just listen to some of my favorite worship songs and think about it and set my mind on God. There's all types of disciplines, fasting, and many more we could talk about. But there's one that the Apostle Paul is getting at here in this passage that is a spiritual discipline that is often neglected and we don't speak about it enough. And it's the discipline of obedience. Of obedience. If you want to open up space for the Spirit of God to speak, to comfort, to encourage, to guide you, pursue obedience. Not out of earning for God as if you're under the law, but because you know that the ways of God are better and you want the Spirit to guide you. It's fighting against the desires of the flesh. You see, the Apostle Paul says that the Spirit of God and the desires of the flesh are contrary to one another. They're in conflict with one another. The struggle is freedom. This sounds so foreign, but it's true. The struggle to follow God, the struggle to be obedient, the struggle to follow the Spirit and have the Spirit of God speak the ways and words of God over your life so that it's oriented in the direction that God has for you. That pursuit of obedience. As one of my favorite pastors, Eugene Peterson, said, it's long obedience in the same direction. The pursuit of obedience is freedom. You experience freedom in the restriction, in the surrender, in the sacrifice, in the focus. Here is where the Spirit speaks and produces the very fruit that our innermost being desires. Remember, I said at the very beginning that learning how to play guitar takes time. And I said that because I want you to understand that not only is freedom, the struggle of being obedient, the place in which you discover freedom, but freedom itself, spiritual freedom, it takes time. When I first started to play guitar, it felt so foreign to me. I thought, I'm never going to be able to play Wonderwall. That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted. I was like, I have two hands and they have to work together but do different things. But the more I played and the more I kept working through it and fumbling through it, I learned how to do a little. And if I stayed with it, I would have learned more songs. I would have learned how to play more things. Maybe not Neon, but I would have, could have played worship music. That's what I could have done. But it takes time. It takes time. And the pursuit of discovering spiritual freedom and seeing the fruit of the Spirit manifest and established in your life through struggling, through focusing on obedience with God, it takes time, which means that you have to give grace to yourself. Freedom requires grace. It requires God's grace over you, unmerited favor that you cannot earn or perform for God, and it requires you giving grace to yourself. Regardless of whether you came in here tonight feeling like you're under the law and you have this legalistic tendency, or you feel like you're over the law and you just live however you want with no restraint at all, you have to give grace to yourself. Freedom takes grace. See, the basis of our faith is that God has given us grace, that He loves us and He forgives us and He has mercy on us, and our sin and our shame and our guilt was crucified at the cross, and Jesus was buried and resurrected so that we get the free gift of salvation, that we are children of God, that we are loved, that we are provided for and protected and established, not because we've done anything, but because Jesus has done everything for us. And that the life that we get to live, not have to live, but get to live with Jesus, is a life where we're like, I need to give grace to myself because God gives grace to me. I want to sit under God's grace. I want to think well. Am I more pulled towards legalism or license so that I can focus myself to walk with the Spirit, pursue a life of obedience, and see the Spirit produce the very fruit that I desire to experience in my life? There's a quote I want to close with that comes from a theologian, Gerhard Ford. This is his take on living by the Spirit. It's not on the screen, but it's in the notes app, so just listen. If we are saved and sanctified and made more like Christ in our life, if we are saved and sanctified only by the unconditional grace of God, we ought to be able to become more truthful and lucid about the way things really are with us. The grace of God should lead us to see the truth about ourselves and to gain a certain humor, a certain down-to-earthness, when we come to realize that if we are going to be saved, it shall have to be absolutely by grace alone. Then we will be more like Jesus. Then we will produce the fruits of the Spirit. Then we will find freedom. God will have His way with us at last. Will you pray with me?